hold space for your darkness, a first responder mental health podcast hosted by me, Erin, where we have conversations about what it's like to perform a first responder role and the mental health challenges that can accompany it. Hello and welcome to another episode of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness, a first responder mental health podcast. I'm your host, Erin, and today I am joined by Jeff Fields. Jeff has spent over 2 decades in law enforcement at both the state and federal levels. He performed uniform duties as well as roles as a narcotics agent and field deputy medical investigator in the state of New Mexico. He held uniform and detective positions in Arizona, as well as positions as a DEA officer, before transitioning over to the Department of Homeland Security, where he worked in both the states of Arizona and DC, before becoming a postal inspector and criminal investigator for the US Postal Service in North Carolina. Jeff is now retired as of August 2022. He's now a public safety education and consulting advocate, where his organization is 1333 Consulting. And he's also the author of Sobe from Sin, which is his memoir about his journey through addiction and finding himself as a public speaker and law enforcement addiction advocate, as well as his search for spiritual and personal redemption. So after that giant mouthful, Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Erin.
No, this is lovely. Thank you for making the time. I appreciate it. So I'll sort of kick off like, we normally do. And what made you want to join law enforcement in the first place, Jeff?
So I come from a family of law enforcement. My father was a local and federal also. 27 years he spent in law enforcement. Federal law enforcement, I should say. So he has over 30 years, actually. And so I think that kind of drove me in that direction. I didn't think I was capable of doing anything else, to be honest with you. So that's kind of where my journey started, was through him.
So kind of like better the devil you know type of thing.
Yeah, for better or worse. I mean, when I reflect back, I'm like, oh man, I should have thought for myself, I guess. But I mean, to be honest with you, there were times when I was in college where I was like, man, I really want to be, and I hate the cliche, but I really wanted to be in the storm. You know, I wanted to be out there helping people, and not sitting idle. And I really drove me. I'm a helper, I think, by nature.
And I think generally speaking, most people with that innate nature are drawn to the first responder roles. It doesn't always matter how we get there in the end. Sort of you worked in so many, like I just, ran off a very, very brief like resume of all the different departments that you worked in over the span of your career. Was that sort of part of you, like continually like seeking opportunities and promotions, or was it like, I don't know, I guess sort of continually seeking something that you weren't really sure what the answer was for?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of both, and not to get like too deep too quickly here. So, yeah, I mean, I think my whole story is that I was always trying to find some sense of purpose with myself, and trying to please others, I guess. So I figured if I had a role where I was doing X, Y, and Z. Oh, look at me now. Are you proud of me? No. So I'll do something else. And also just trying to find whatever it was to try to like, feed whatever. And again, I still don't know what it was, that fire inside of me, because I tried chasing, position titles. Well, that only gets you so far. And then really, are you doing, the work? And then I started chasing money. Well, that turns out to be, the worst thing I could have done is chase the money. And that's what happened when I went federal. And so I guess the journey was more of a self-identity type thing. and in the end, part of my journey was that identity means nothing. I'm a child of God. That's the only thing that matters. And so, that kind of, in a nutshell, is why I jumped around so much. I was a nomad, is what they call it in law enforcement. Trying to find my place and just never finding it. What's concerning with me is I didn't know exactly where it would lead me. Like, I never had a goal in mind, right? I never was like, okay, if I make this pinnacle in my career, that's where it's going to be like, oh, I can relax. No, it was a constantly moving goal. And yeah, it benefited me, and I had some success in it, but I never had happiness with it. So it was I can't even put the word to it right now. It was like a bumpy road of leading me to here where I needed to be. But man, if you had asked me 10 years ago, this is where you're going to be now, I would have been like, you're crazy. That's not where I want to be.
I said you sort of bounced around a lot between like a few sort of different state departments and positions, and was like, and I know you said, it wasn't necessarily like some kind of like divine plan in place for you, or one that necessarily you were aware of at the time. Were you kind of like trying to get all these like different experience then to be sort of like more attractive for like a federal position, or did like Department of Homeland Security kind of just pop up out of the blue and you're like, I want to go for that?
So it was a little bit of both. Yeah, because a lot of the local agencies I worked for, my prime goal was to gain the experience to hopefully be able to promote me into a federal position. I was following my dad's footsteps, which this is a bad thing in my world. So, because he was a local cop before, and then he went federal. And he was a local cop for 4 years and then went federal. And so my plan was like, oh, after 4 years, I'm going to do the same thing. Well, no, it took more like 10. So it took forever for me to get a position federally. And Homeland Security kind of just popped up because I had been working diversion cases like prescription fraud stuff in Arizona.
Okay.
And so I had a case that led me to doing kind of like an internal investigation on a Homeland Security employee in Arizona who was abusing fentanyl. And so when I got the case, I was like, well, where am I going to take this? I mean, I could do the case on my own, but I need more information. What agency handles that? Yeah. And so there, within Homeland Security, there is the watchdog. It's the Inspector General's office. So basically, we're doing all of the criminal. The Inspector General does all the criminal internal affairs for Homeland Security, and I caught the eye of the supervisor there in Tucson, and so that's what kind of led me into that position. And I actually loved the position probably for 3 or 4 years, and then after that, I'm like, man, I miss police work. Because really it does slow down a lot federally. I mean, I know there are some agencies that are more active, but mine was more administrative. But yeah, I mean, and I thought it was the pinnacle. And my wife's in federal law enforcement. She works for a 3-letter agency. It really isn't, in my opinion. It wasn't like the end all and like, hey, look at me now. I mean, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. And I'm not jaded, or I'm not angry about, my career in federal law enforcement. I think it's more so that I've become more of a realist, and I'm very transparent. But because of my father, who was very cynical towards the government, I myself am cynical, not just the government and law enforcement in general. And so I think I just got burnt out. And I'm kind of going further into that question than you probably wanted me to. But yeah, like yes, it was a notch on my belt, but it wasn't what I thought it would be.
Yep. And I think that's kind of pretty common sometimes when we hold something up, this like lofty height or this desire
Yeah.
of like, yes, once I reach that point, it's either everything's going to be awesome, my life's going to be better, or that kind of thing. And then you get there and you're like,
No.
oh, exactly. And I sort of in my research before we jumped on and had this conversation, I heard you mention something, and it was pretty poignant that you said, like, after your experience in the federal law enforcement realm and come the time of you leaving, you said that you felt like a broken toy.
Yeah. And I mean, that had a lot to do. So towards the end of my career, the last 7 years, I was really stuck in addiction with alcohol for a lot of reasons. And I think if I had stayed in local law enforcement, and I don't know what would have happened, but to me, in my advocacy now, I'm seeing that local law enforcement departments seem to have a better grasp on their people.
Mm-hmm.
Where in federal government, you're a number.
Yeah.
Because they're so large. And so when I had a DUI, I think 5 years before I left,
Wow.
they did not handle the situation the way I thought that they would. I mean, I ended up getting promoted out of it, not because of the DUI, but I got a promotion. But in actuality, I needed help. And then in the last 2 years of my career, when I had some other incidents happen that involved alcohol, I was definitely felt that I was just a number. Like, hey, shape up or ship out. There's no fixing it. Where I had a top secret security clearance, and in the government, you have to have we call them re-ups, but basically where they do a check to see what had happened in the last 5 years with you. And constantly lying on those all the time, like everything's fine. Are you going to counseling? You always minimize it, makes it better. You say, oh yeah, I'm marriage counseling. Oh, okay. Are you on any medications? Oh, absolutely not. I never take medications. Because that if you answer those questions in a certain way, it could jeopardize your clearances. And so that in itself started to make me feel like, well, there's something wrong with me. Because if the government thinks that if I'm trying to better myself, my relationships or whatever it is a negative against me, well, then obviously I must be broken. So, and it is very disheartening because there are so many others that I know. I mean, I know a lot of people who struggle with some type of addiction, or some that are in the federal government law enforcement realm, or that are struggling with their marriage. But you don't want to talk about it because, you're chasing the money, or you're chasing the pension, or you're chasing the identity of the title. So it really bums me out.
Yeah, that's obviously so incredibly challenging to come at it from your perspective too, of like, you're probably at that point where you're like, I know that I need some kind of assistance. I'm clearly struggling, and that self-realization, but then juggling that up against, well, I need my security clearance to keep doing my job. And then if they know that, this is an issue, or I asked to go to rehab or a detox or anything like that, I'm going to be considered a liability. And then that's like the end of it. And like the juxtaposition of you trying to juggle, what's best for your career and then what's best for your family life, your home life, your personal circumstances. Like it's not a fair situation to be placed in at all.
Oh, and I didn't know that there were so many resources out there like I know now. On the federal side, I don't know of many. I know of a lot, like I said, with the local side, that I see a lot of departments are more educated on it. But when you're looked at just as a number, they spend so much money on training you, like hundreds of thousands of dollars and time. But for them to just be like, whatever, and I think in the end, in my story, it needed to happen that way because the career was just not for me anymore. But my concern now is for others, who are the breadwinner of their family, or they need to do their service because it's important for their community. that, that they find the help that they need, or at least some type of support, because in the end, you're not any different from anybody else. You just have a different challenge that can be resolved. It's never fixed, but it's resolved, where you can do your job very well. And I just didn't see that. But again, my journey is a whole lot different. I mean, I think I was on the wrong path from the get-go.
Yeah. And I think there's different people have different capabilities of being able to like put that mask up. And like you're saying, you got through, like 22 years of a career where by the sounds of it, almost half of that you were struggling severely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hate to say this because it really started when I went federal. And my wife says it's because I went to the wrong agency, which is very true. But my cynicism would have kicked in at one point because my dad was so adamant about how poorly run the government and a lot of agencies are. And it is so true. It is absolutely, they're not the answer. Trust me, I know. Couldn't even I always tell people, when you think government's the answer, just remember they could not perfect overnight delivery. They had to go to a private company. So, I mean, it's smoke and mirrors. I mean, there's a lot of great people. There's a lot of great agencies. I shouldn't poo-poo at all, but I'm just saying, think about yourself first.
Yeah, very much so. And I think it especially in a country this large with the population, and you know what I mean, like the amount of moving parts, I don't think anything like that is going to be operating at an optimal level when there's just this side doesn't know what that side's doing, and the amount of like interagency bullshit that I'm sure goes on, like, and we even learned, like 9/11 style, these people knew stuff, and they weren't communicating. And not to say that could have been prevented, but there are things that, might have helped a little bit.
Well, and that definitely leads me to tell you, like, so when Homeland Security was stood up in 2003, after 9/11, because of 9/11, they absorbed so many agencies. It's a behemoth of an agency. It's got so many components to it. So something's bound not to run well, right? I mean, the missions are all over the place. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a separate topic, and I could talk hours for it about it. But yeah, when you're when you're a convoluted person going into a convoluted situation, it's not going to really get any clearer.
That's challenging at the best of times, no doubt. And so obviously, like, over the span of a 22-year career, and like we're talking about state, federal, like, you really seem to have like run the gambit over like the span of your career, and you would have seen a lot, witnessed a lot, been exposed to a lot. Like, what was the turning point for you? Like, was it sort of like a cumulative build? Was there like a straw that broke the camel's back that sort of made you realize and recognize, go, you know what, like, I'm just all done?
It was accumulative, that's for sure. I think that my addiction obviously played a huge part in it. I've had 2 neck surgeries towards the end of my career. My neck is fused. So and it's a congenital thing, so it's not like it was work related, which I wish it were. But because of that, it was increasingly getting harder for me to do my job. Sitting at desks, I was scared to death about getting in a scuffle with somebody and getting in a headlock, which the chances of that at my position was very slim, but still. But the addiction definitely was a huge component of it all. And obviously my family, things weren't getting better for me, and I was so unhappy. And I became so absolutely apathetic in my career. I mean, it was just ugly because, when you have younger people starting their careers out and they're wanting to do all this fun stuff and do this and that, where I just didn't give a crap, man. I really didn't care. And the job to me was easy. because when you're so large, all you have to do is just like it's like the whole movie Office Space, right? You do just enough to keep people off your back, which isn't much. And so that was me. And it's not like when you're a patrol cop and you're working a beat, people are going to know when you're lazy, right? And so, yeah, the apathy. So, I mean, there wasn't necessarily a turning point outside of some of the incidents I had around alcohol and the way the agencies handled it, but it definitely made it easier for me to leave, because in spite of it all, and yeah, I was scared to death. I didn't know what I was going to do next. I mean, I'll still get my pension. I'm still a little too young to get my pension, but does that really matter? Like, I really don't care. Like, I'm so much happier now, doing whatever I'm doing. I really don't know. I mean, I've always wanted to write my book, obviously, and I want to write more now because I have a lot to say, because it's very cathartic for me. I just very so. I'm starting to go off topic here, but yeah, like the decision between my wife and I, like, hey, is it right for me? Should I continue to fight the fight and try to get, in positions or other positions or do whatever? And we never found there was never a solid yes, because I'm a better person. So my addiction, curiously, I got sober when I left my career. And so that says a lot because it was easier for me to walk away from alcohol than it was easier for me to walk away from my career than it was alcohol. So
Yeah. And that's, yeah, definitely sort of saying something in that respect. And from a complete, like, outsider's perspective, like, been stalking you over the last couple of days doing research, and the photos of you when you were either in a uniform or wearing your, DHS gear, as opposed to your life afterwards, like, there's like an actual, like, physiological change, like you can actually see it.
yeah, a literal weight, like my face was like a blimp. Absolutely. And I appreciate you saying that because I mean it does show that I was on the wrong path, right? I mean, they always say, I'd rather be poor and happy than rich and miserable, and I am. I mean, what is a career anyway? Right? I mean, what is a title anyway? I mean, if you're a crappy parent, what does it matter? Or if you're not present for your kids, what does it matter? I mean, so that too is another, you know, big component to a lot of my decisions. Was I wasn't a good father, I wasn't a good husband, I wasn't around, uh, not just physically, but we need that. Yeah, society needs that. It's so bad right now, and all we're doing by staying in those vicious cycles of me, selfishness, is creating more selfish little beings that grow up to be selfish people, right? And so we need good mothers like you and good husbands like your husband, and so that really, I didn't have the stereotypical childhood by any means, and so I mean I think a lot of that, and it's reflected right later on in our life, and so that's a bad thing because you have to break that cycle at one point, because when does it end? Does it end with somebody in your family killing themselves or drinking themselves to death? you know but what you're doing with this, or what we're trying to do, is good because maybe we'll spark a revival, along with others that we follow on Instagram and stuff, which I hate social media, by the way, but it really needs to be done. And I get excited because, again, like I said, I always look for purpose, right? I was looking for purpose in my career, and now I know my purpose is to obviously try to help others instead of helping myself like I did for so many years. But um, it's a pay it forward thing, right? I really want everybody's journey to be a pay it forward, and you may not see the fruits of it, but man, 2 generations from now, yeah. And which, by the way, I love the name of your podcast, and that, where you got it from. I had read that before, and it is. Absolutely so true. And it's funny, I didn't see that uh, quote from until after I had left, my career, but it is so true because it does give you some perspective on what your position is in life, right? And you can't. There's so many influencers and coaches online right now that have never been in your shoes, right? And so it's important, like you said, I've been in the dark, or I am in the dark. Let me help be the guiding light, and so share your story. And I'm not a big AA guy, but it is very useful. And there are some principles that I follow. But one of the things that you do and to help somebody else out that's struggling, and it can be with any of addiction, it doesn't even have to be a substance, but is you don't tell them what to do, you show them what you're doing. Because these people already have issues with control or being told what to do all the time. So let me set an example for you. And this is working for me. Now, it may not look the same, whatever you do as me, but let me tell you, it's working. Right. And so that's the principle I try to use going into everything. It's just be an example, being a light to others. So love it.
So, sort of given we sort of like touched on a couple of different sort of bits and pieces and aspects, and I definitely want to like hear about your book and all that kind of thing. But sort of one of the things that I have been really interested to ask you, and especially because you have worked for like so many different organizations, state, federal, like you really like the complete gambit. What was there? And I know we're talking 20 years and the mental health conversation has changed significantly in that time, but were there any mental health resources provided, encouraged, tools like at your disposal in sort of as across the span of any of those departments?
No. I didn't seek out like I should, but when I did need some type of assistance, so the government has an EAP program, the Employee Assistance Program, and typically those programs are um, subcontracted with whatever agency you're with. And so the time that I did reach out, I got a hold of a counselor on the other line, and he was like, "Oh, we don't even have this contract anymore with your agency." And I was like, "You gotta be, well, here, let me give you some resources, some people I know in the area, but sorry." And I was like, "You gotta be kidding me. We should have some of the," yeah, yeah. So that really turned me off to the whole thing. And again, I'm like, well, if my source of a lot of my discomfort at the time was my job, why am I reaching out to my job for help? When I had my DUI and I went to rehab twice when I was working federally. You would have thought after those times when I returned from work, which I had to get medical clearances to get back on the job, even though the decision to go to rehab was my own. I wasn't told to go. Um, I felt, like I said earlier, a broken toy where I thought, they would be like, well, what can we do for you? How can we help you now? You obviously have a problem. No, it was more like, well, you're going to sit at your house for 3 months while our contracted doctor reviews your file to see if you're capable of performing your position. And so I was like, well, man, I made a huge mistake going to rehab. Damn it. So like it really didn't sit well with me. And I was like, well, they don't have my best interest. Like you said before, I was a liability to them.
3 months, and that's ugh. I mean, yeah, there's not much to be said about that, is there?
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure there are some larger agencies, both locally and federally, that have great systems. I mean, my wife's agency has a great peer support program, and I know some managers at her agency and other agencies where they have the interest of the employee, but it really is subjective to what division you are or where you are in the United States, because it's not overall, it's not the agency, it's the local managers that have that space for their darkness, where when you get higher up and you have attorneys to start to look at your employee file, well, now how big of a liability are they for us? You know, and so I think that's the general consensus on all of it. And so I think, like I said before, a lot of individuals don't seek out the help because of that. And it's only going to get worse because we already have a mental health issue in our country that's getting worse, you know, and there's a million things that are causing it. And so the new generation of people going into law enforcement, unfortunately, have this baggage with them. So I'm pleased by, you know, seeing a lot of things out there now that are trying to help people within their agencies, but it's got to be more of a standard. I don't think there's a standard there. It's very piecemealed. And so, and again, I could be completely wrong because I don't know entirely everything that's out there, but that's the issue right there. I don't know. You know, if we had a standard, then everybody would know. It always makes me think of the movie. Have you seen the Departed? Okay, so like the part where Leonardo DiCaprio, you know, goes and he's talking to the therapist, and he was like, you know, I can't remember all the words, but he was like, you know, we signed up for this job. Am I supposed to come in here and talk about it when I signed up to do whatever it was, right? You know, get into shooting or whatever. Yeah, you did sign up for it, and you should mentally prepare yourself going into a career for traumatic events. But what we're not taught coping. And just saying that I signed up for it, or I'm a man, or I'm a woman, you know, in uniform, I'm supposed to have this type of bravado, that's not going to cut it. What coping skills do you have? That's what we need to teach, because I obviously didn't have coping skills. Well, yeah, I had skills in drinking, but the coping, the tools on the belt of learning how to navigate any type of traumatic events that are going on and off duty is where I think that it needs to be pushed. And you hit the nail on the head. Your rapport needs to be built because you're already dealing with type A personalities who a lot of them think, you know, mental health is fluff. So you need to really push the narrative that, hey, it's not. It's just talking to somebody. You don't have to go in there and cry and talk about, you know, your dad spanked you when you were a kid. It's not that. That's not what it's about. It's about feeling comfortable with being able to talk about whatever's on your mind right now. And so, I mean, hopefully that's the direction we're going to go, simply because there is more mental health issues in the country. Um, but again, why in the world would you want me to um, lie on my clearances in order to carry a gun? Um, would you rather me not be treated in carrying a gun? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me.
And so you've also been really kindly, like, open and honest, and we've, you know, obviously touched on it like a fair bit during our conversation about your struggles with addiction, and namely alcohol, and which obviously led to your, you know, your book Sober from Sin. Talk to me about how that, and if you're obviously comfortable doing so, like how that addiction came about, because you said that it was sort of like the last 7 years of your career. You know, you mentioned like going federal had like a little bit to do with it. Was there sort of something that really kind of triggered it off for you, or it was just your backpack kind of got full and you were like, that's it?
Oh, that's a good way to put it. The backpack analogy. I like that because that is what happened.
I can't claim ownership, so feel free.
I so I I have always been a very heavy drinker, a binge drinker, and then the whole law enforcement culture. You know, that's what we do. We drink together as brothers and sisters, and so it was never anything that was unusual. And so I also had known that I had been something had happened in my childhood. I wasn't quite sure what it was. I couldn't put my finger on it. And then as I got older, and I had always had nightmares about some type of childhood sexual trauma. I couldn't really figure it out. But then as I got when after I got married, and my comfort level and my safety levels went up, which they typically say that's when you know, some of these flashbacks happen. I started having these flashbacks and nightmares, and they all revolved around, something that happened to me at night when I was a kid. And my drinking started to increase. Now, my drinking had already been unusually high, but I didn't know that it was an issue until I had an audience, like I say in my book. My wife, she was like, "You drink a lot. It's not normal the way you drink." And I'm like, "Well, that's what you do in law enforcement. It's not, what's the big deal?" And she's like, "Well, no, I mean, it's one thing going out and having drinks, but then you come home and continue." Because that's what I did when I was a bachelor. It wasn't a big deal. So it turned out it was a self-soothing activity for me. And along with the nightmares, I started trying to piece things together because, in law enforcement, we're problem solvers, right? I wanted to have an investigation on my past, and which frustrated me and was intuitive, I should add, because you're not going to find it. And it frustrated me forever and made things worse. But, a therapist once told me it's not your job to fix yourself. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess the short of it is that, yeah, I think the culmination of the drinking, the more frequent nightmares, and then really evaluating what had happened in my past, the flashbacks started to make a little bit more sense. My behavior as in college and early in my career, some of the things I was doing didn't seem to be normal. I was, objectify women. I, just have a hatred towards women, or a resentment, I should say, because the culprit in my story as a kid was a woman. And so I was trying to put it all together. And then I actually worked on a lot of cases that involved rape or child pornography or stuff like that when I was working, and was drawn to those cases, which is curious, right? And learning the tactics in that and understanding how suspects thought and worked started to make sense in my head about my past. And so that's where I was like, holy cow, I'm a victim of something. Alcohol is my coping mechanism. So now what do I do with this? And that's where the alcohol jumped in, because I didn't know what to do with it. And so, I saw hundreds of therapists, and I found a couple really good ones that helped me navigate through it. But I just never was quite to the point of submission. And I think that's because my body was so used to living in chaos, anxiety, and trying to either put a Band-Aid on it or fix it. And if I couldn't do either, then I was just going to give up, because I didn't know what to do. And it's weird, because I was more comfortable being in some type of chaotic situation or stressful situation than I was being in a calm situation. And that's just what I'm used to. And it's still to this day, I have trouble just relaxing. And that's just part of the whole psychological journey I have. But what was the question? It
was about, where the start of your drinking addiction came.
Yeah. So the drinking, I mean, so I had already been a heavy drinker, and obviously I know it was for a reason, the heavy drinking, to be okay with myself. And so, like I said, the drinking addiction, when my wife started pointing out the issues, and then the progressiveness of drinking, it's crazy how quickly it progresses. Even if you I had an 18-month sobriety stint. And then, of course, you always think that it's controlled after that, which it never will be. The button's broken in my brain, so there's no turning back. And when I jumped back into drinking after that 18 months, I hit it harder than I ever had, to the point where there were times when I had to be rushed to the emergency room because of my blood pressure or my anxiety. My liver enzymes were through the roof. My body was shutting down in a lot of areas. And so it's crazy, and you can't really put your finger on the one time where it just switched over from that to that. But no, I had a therapist tell me once, he said, "Hey, he had been sober for 30 years. He said, "Hey, if I drink tomorrow, I'm going to be dead because I know that what I'm going, how the intake is going to be such that it will kill me." And now I didn't understand it at the time. Now I do, because I know if I were to relapse again, all bets are off. I mean, I'm going to be dead, because there's just no way of me casually drinking ever again. So, yeah, and then to add to it, the career this is where I talk about being in the wrong field for me, which I think that the trauma throughout my career just compounded on top of that complex trauma that was already there. And so not knowing how to handle my own trauma and then adding that other trauma to it didn't help at all. I thought it was just normal parts of the job. Simply put, my personal trauma made the trauma of the job seem dull. It didn't bother me. I thrived. That's why I was a death investigator for 2.5 years. I thrived on the dramatic scenes, the deaths, the blood, the guts, all that stuff. The kids didn't bother me. Obviously now I could never do it because I have a daughter, but there's the jaded side of law enforcement, like, oh yeah, I thrive on that. Well, if it doesn't bother you a little bit, there's something wrong with you. Yeah, so I got long-winded on that, but yeah, I think like you put so well, it was the backpack was full. And I finally realized I need to take it off instead of trying to continue to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, first of all, thank you for trusting me and sharing that. I know that's would obviously be something really heavy that it's probably taken you a long time to not only feel comfortable admitting and talking about even to people close to you or your therapist, but like speaking about with, and putting it out there. I can't, imagine. So thank you. That's, a lot for you to have carried from your childhood. And I think, like you said, it's everyone's childhood experiences are so subjective. And then we go into these careers where we have that cumulative trauma exposure. And then when it's like you're kind of already starting from like 100 meters behind the starting line, and then it just kind of gets piled on top of you. And then, and it was something that was so telling that you said, like, I'm doing a trauma-informed certification in my free time from my study, because, that's what I do. And it was really interesting how you said, like, it started to kind of creep out for the first time in your life after you got married, because your nervous system felt safe for the first time. So it kind of started to like creep its head out to go, oh, like your body's like, maybe I can kind of start to process it. And it sounds like, it kind of put you into such like a state of overwhelm because you weren't ready or didn't have the tools and able to be able to process it, that you're like, and obviously by the sounds of it too, you had such a significant level of like dissociation from that event in your childhood that then like that is your maladaptive coping mechanisms. Well, I can't just switch it off because I'm an adult now and it doesn't work that way as much. So let's drink copious amounts of alcohol because that'll do the trick.
100%. And I think the body is amazing, or the brain is amazing, right? Because we're created in a way that when you have a traumatic event as a child, your body knows how to do disassociation, where the child doesn't have to be subjected to the horrors of the trauma. But that's got to go somewhere. And like you said, when you're an adult, it will start percolating up, where hopefully you have the ability to process it, which nobody will. It takes work. And then to go back to that fact that you said, yeah, with my wife, and I've known so many other men where, yeah, you get to that safe space and that's where things start coming out. That just goes to show how isolation kills people. Because in my bachelor years, I thrived on being alone. I never wanted to get married. I just wanted to party, drink, and hook up with women all the time. That was my thing. Um, where would I be now at 45 years old if I had continued that path? I mean, I probably wouldn't be here. Um, so I think it's so important to have community. It's so important to talk to people. It's so important to be vulnerable to other people. It doesn't matter how you look or you think you look, because in the end, there's other people suffering like you that are waiting for somebody else to just start the conversation.
And I think you're right. And especially in the, first responder realm, like, even though I was a woman and I worked with a lot of like incredible freaking fierce women, like they are male dominated professions. And so that stigma attached to like appearing weak and not being able to handle it and all that kind of thing. And I look at it like, I personally, and it's like the message that I sort of put out there, like there is more strength and more courage in being able to be authentic and speak your truth and go, freaking bad shit's happened, bad shit's happening, I'm thinking about bad shit, I'm planning bad shit. Like anyone can put on a mask, anyone can fake it, anyone can, do all the shitty things that we do, like behind closed doors and not, and whereas, especially like the gift I think that you're putting out there, especially talking about child sexual assault and, coming from the career and the defining aspects that, you present to the world. You're like, yeah, I'm like this man and I had this incredible career, but fuck me, this happened and it led to this and all that kind of thing. Like, that's a gift that you're giving people because you are living there's nothing weak about admitting any of that. It's raw and authentic truth. And I think that is so incredibly powerful. So I really just take my hat off to you for being in the place in regards to like your healing journey where you're even able to put it out there, because I think it's freaking awesome.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, and you're right with the masks, because I mean, I wore masks my whole life, and I think a lot of people in law enforcement compartmentalize so much. And it's easy to put the uniform on and have that persona, but then not know what to do with yourself later when it comes off. Um, and I grew up in a family where we didn't have problems. No, we did. We just didn't talk about them. And then I had the old school mentality towards law enforcement because my dad, he's a wimp. Look at him. He's not, he's a sissy. He's not manning up, or, stuff like that. And I think there is a very fine line on being tough love, but I also think that having vulnerability and be able to talk about things is much more powerful. Like you said, I saw a post somebody put, they were like, you think it's awesome drinking a whole bunch? Try sitting in your pain. That's the real bravery, right? And because in the end, I hated
that hits deep, doesn't it?
yeah. Yeah, it does, because I was scared to sit in my pain. I still struggle with it, right? I mean, I drink coffee like, coffee and nicotine, that's my vice. But I think that if you sit and listen to your body for a while, it's trying to tell you something. It sucks, but there may be something there you can actually try to fix instead of numbing it out with something that's mind altering.
Yeah. And I think if you've read Brene, I'm pretty sure you would have read The Body Keeps the Score. Oh, isn't that just like such a defining book? And I read that and What Happened to You, like directly, like one after the other, and it just changes your mindset like so much in the way that you view things. And I think as well, like, and it's obviously I'm Australian, like drinking culture is such just like a massive part of just being an Aussie, and then add that into like a first responder career. And we used to work like night shifts. Our entire night shifts were based around drinking. We used to have, they're called EOs, early openers. So you'd finish at 7 a.m. on a Friday, and then you'd go and drink until whatever time, and then like try to rock up to work in invariably some kind of shape of sobriety, probably feeling terrible. And then we'd have night shift drinks, and then the Sunday finish at 7 a.m., go back to work at 3 p.m., finish at 11 p.m., and then go out drinking. Like it was all, that was just part of the culture. And I think as well, when you're not saying you were like predispositioned, but the fact that I think most of us use drinking as a coping mechanisms.
Acceptance too. I mean, yeah, I had a sergeant that he didn't drink, but he would show up at the bars when we were there, to just kind of monitor his crew, right? His squad. And he would, when he was about to leave, he'd always say, hey, on your way in tomorrow, if you see the white van parked at the station, which was hey, blow into the, random drug test type thing, keep driving and call in sick. So he was protecting his people. And I'm like, at the time I was like, that's freaking awesome. This guy's awesome. Right. Well, in hindsight, I'm like, well, that's not really awesome. I mean, there were times when I worked patrol and we tell each other like, hey, don't do any DUIs this morning because you're not gonna be able to tell who smells and if it's you. Right. So it's,
Yep. And that's how it was. Like the guys I worked with at the start of my career would talk about, they would drive around with like, a slab. So I don't know if you get a slab here. A slab's like 24 cans. And they would just drive around with like a slab of beer in the back, just cruising around. Like it's what they did. It's what they did.
on patrol. Yeah. That was my federal career. For some reason, I was able to luckily didn't do anything bad in uniform because I, for some reason, had a respect for the position. But once I got federal and I was more incognito, right, in an unmarked vehicle. Really, there's no accountability with your employees because they go do their thing. I mean, I would sit and park. There's parts of the city I live in now that I refuse to go drive around because it just really is like a PTSD thing for me because I would spend hours drinking in my government car and then go back to work. I mean, it's beyond me that my progression and my addiction got to that point, because if you would have asked me that as a new recruit, I'd been like, no way.
Yeah. Yeah. And we all go into it with our bright little naive eyes, I think, like, and even you having like the experience of your father being in law enforcement and granted like the cynicism sort of rubbed off. And I think that's sort of pretty common. Like I worked with some, salty, crusty, like senior blokes when I first started, and legit like 2 years in, I sort of had like taken on some of their like, and I'm like, and I actually had like the self-realization. I'm like, what are you doing? Like you've been in the job for like 2 years. I'm like, you don't get to have this attitude, like snap out of it. So no good. But so you obviously like talked about the fact that like you left law enforcement and then you went down the path of getting sober. But one thing I sort of did want to touch on, your faith is clearly something that's very, very important to you, and like a resource that you've definitely leaned on during your journey to sobriety. Like talk to me about how that has helped you in the capacity that it has, and was that something that you leaned on during your law enforcement career, or was that something that's kind of come about afterwards?
I mean, I've always known God. I just didn't listen to him, and I grew up Catholic. And so I won't go into that because I don't know who your listeners are, but I mean, I'm a recovering Catholic. That's what I tell people, just simply because my experience, or at least with the church I was at, wasn't well. And so,
Mm-hmm. They lean hard into the shame. Catholicism really does.
yes, they do. And if you're already dealing with shame and guilt, right, from trauma, that it's not a good combination. So I don't like to say I fell away from it. I just didn't follow it. But my wife brought me back into my faith, because, when you're running out of, and this is terrible, when you're running out of options because of your addiction, and then you run to faith, it's like, well, why didn't you have faith in the first place? And you wouldn't have been there. And part of the journey with tackling addiction in recovery is finding something bigger than yourself. And so that's where I really learned that, God's bigger than me. He can handle any problem. It's not going to look how I want it to look. If I sit here and throw a tantrum because it's not the way I want it to look, well, I'm selfish again. So I think that by that surrendering has absolutely helped me in my journey in recovery, and it continues to this day. I'm a very structured person. I need that structure that I get. I don't use the word religion because it's man-made. So I do what I have to do. I'm very active in the church that I go, a non-denominational church now. So I'm a proud Christian and Christ follower. Um, I don't do it because I'm supposed to. I do it because I know I need to be thankful for where I am now. And that's, what I do. And I tell people all the time, you don't have to be like a Bible thumper. Just, just, just give credit where credit's due, because you're here because of a reason, and you are navigating through whatever you're going through because of God. But if you're not leaning on it and you're trying to make your own decisions or your own using your own tools to get through something, you're never going to succeed. And that's where it drives me crazy, because people only go to God when something's wrong. Now I know if you go to God when it's the valleys and the hills, right? You got to praise in the valleys. Yeah, you got to praise in the valleys just like you praise on the hill. And so that's what I'm learning now. If you're grateful, it's a gratitude thing. If you're grateful all the time, no matter what, where you are, things don't seem as bad as they are. And so that's been my journey with that. It continues to be, it'll always be my journey. And I think it's so important that I continue to try to instill that in my family, especially my daughters, um, because this will help them. I pray that it helps them navigate life better than I did. Um, so, and being a light to others, and that's our purpose. I think, people say, I don't know what my purpose in life is. What's to help other people? It's not to help you. You'll get the fruits of helping other people. So yeah, to answer your question, absolutely, faith has been a huge component of it. I wouldn't be here if I didn't have it.
Yep. No, and thank you for sharing that. Like, just sort of on like the back end, like I was raised Catholic, and I don't think it was anything that like my parents had thought much about. And then after my dad passed away, like my mum's parents were sort of not very religious, but very like spiritual in that sense. And we were brought into the church, you know, church every Sunday or that kind of thing. And because I think my mum wanted us to have some other kind of structure in our life, because she's like, it's going to be hard. It's just me. And, as from like a child's perspective, I don't like, similar to you, I'm not like, this like component of Catholicism, and even from like a young age, I sort of asked a lot of kind of questions, because it was like, my dad completed suicide and you tell me that that's a sin and he's not where, then you're kind of telling me where he's meant to be. And, a little sort of 7 or 8 year old, like asking a priest that question. It's an interesting to see the look on their face. But from a child's perspective, the main thing it did, it gave me a sense of comfort. it gave me something that made me go, okay, like I've suffered this loss. And for me, really, it was like a loss of never having that person around and what that implied. But, it was something nice to kind of go, well, my dad's in heaven, and have that concept that there's somewhere that people get to go. Like I grew up praying to Santa because that's what made sense to me, because we would pray to God. I would pray to my dad and I would pray to Santa. But I think, I know it's weird, but I think just anything that gives you comfort, and whether that is, that structured religion, whether it's that non-denominational thing, like you're saying, like just, and whatever your God is, like I sort of teach my kids all kinds of different things. Like I say, some people believe in God, some people believe in Allah, some people believe in reincarnation. And, we look at like a butterfly and go be like, oh, that could be so-and-so. Like, I think just any concept that's going to bring you comfort when you are perhaps going through a difficult time, I'm like, I'm sold, whatever works for you, I think is important.
Yeah. I often tell people that when I went to rehab, it was a mixed crowd, right? That's the other thing too. Try being a law enforcement, guy. And I'm very open. I'm like, yeah, I'm a cop. And of course I'm hated because a lot of people there are either court appointed or being forced by their family. And so you get a crowd of people, especially the younger crowd, where they're like, well, I don't believe in God. God did this to me. God gave me this addiction or whatever. And so they teach, you're right, and especially in AA, they're like, well, you just find something bigger than you to get you through this. Higher power is what they call it. But it's crazy to me, after 6 or 7 months, these people are like, there is something there. There is, like, I think there is a God, because, and I'm like, it's beautiful because they're finally allowing themselves to be small. And that's what's needed. And so I think in the end, like you said, you have to have some type of source and some type of like something bigger than you that gets you to that point of submission, because if we had it figured out, we would have fixed it. And we're obviously not fixers.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. And there was sort of also something that I know that you've spoken about, and I'm sure it's probably like an ongoing process for you, but learning to forgive yourself, which I guess is probably a part of recovery. And I know you said you're not really like bang into the whole AA like philosophy necessarily, but talk to me about what that journey has been like in terms of learning to have forgiveness for where you've been and the trajectory that you continue to be on.
I mean, it's tough. It's a daily process for me, especially having the makeup that I have of guilt and shame, right? So I really try to focus on being in the present moment all the time. Because obviously, like they say, the past is dead. You can't do anything with it. The future's not here. It's contingent on what you do right now. And so I really try to pull myself into the moment. A lot of grounding that I do. I have my meditation prayer time in the morning every day, and I have to have it in order to set my day straight. And I think that has helped me a lot because it pulls me back into the center. I like to say, right? You're not to the right, you're not to the left, you're in the middle. Towards the end of the day, it wanes, absolutely. But then I can restart the next day, and I have to tell myself that every day. And another AA thing is, at the end of the day, you do an inventory. What did I do wrong for the day? What could have been better, or what was good? All right, I'm going to bed. Let's put it to bed, because the next day is a new day. And so that's what I really try to practice, because if I sit back, and there are times where it hits me, it's a fleeting, but it'll hit me and I'm like, holy cow, I gave up a successful career, but then I roll over and I'm like, I have my family right now. That's staying in the moment.
Yeah. And continuing down certain paths you may not have.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I honestly don't think, Erin, I'd be able.
Yeah. And again, even that recognition and realization is, something to be thankful and grateful for. But yeah, at the same time, it's heavy to sit with too, no doubt.
Well, and I should add, it's hard. People think, I mean, it's not easy. It is absolutely hard. But if it were easy, we would screw up all the time. If you work at it, then you're like, this is valuable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's definitely something to be said, and it's something I've spoken about on like previous episodes, but learning the concept of self-compassion and just, being able, I think it allows you to sit in that uncomfortableness of, like you're saying, doing shitty things or saying shitty things or anything like that, and just kind of being able to kind of go, all right, like, wasn't my finest moment, but it happens, and we're going to like move on from that, and just kind of allowing it to, like, acknowledging it and then kind of just letting it go. Like, I think it's
day at a time, as they say.
And you talking about learning to forgive yourself, I think there's also something, and I've sort of, it's kind of something I've been like grappling with the last couple of weeks too, like learning to have compassion for our younger selves, learning to forgive ourselves for not handling something in the moment or in the situation in the way that either we think we expected that we would, or that we would have liked to have. And I think learning about how our nervous system responds, and we really have no control over whether it's the fight or flight, which is the ones that kind of everyone knows about, but then there's like the freeze and fawn. And I think there can be so much self-judgment and shame that we attach to our responses to things that have happened to us in our lives. And so then actually learning to forgive yourself for going, oh, well, like I thought I'd always be like a fight person, but yeah, like I freaking froze or I fawned or whatever else. And that's not me. Like, why did that happen? And learning to forgive yourself, and especially even just for going, you know what, I didn't have the tools at the time. I didn't have the knowledge, the education, and just I think there's power in sort of forgiving those aspects, I think, as well.
Absolutely. And that's what I say too. My parents, for example, they did the best they could with what they had and what they knew. Right. And so I forgive them for, whatever. But I had a therapist tell me exactly what you just said. He said, you cannot control the fight or flight or fawn or freeze. That's just a natural thing. And so when people beat themselves up about it, my therapist said, well, I asked them, well, you're here today, so the decision your body made was the right one.
Yeah. It's a fun journey to find yourself on, isn't it?
I love psychology. I really do. And I envy you for your path, because I too want to, am considering going in that direction eventually, because it is amazing. The whole body keeps the score. I mean, and if you haven't read any of Patrick Carnes' books yet, read his. So he writes books on a lot of childhood trauma, and in reading some of his books, you start to see the patterns of, oh my gosh, everything is consistent with your behavior, but it's so universal, and it's so universal. My wife has educated herself a lot on this. I have a great partner. I really do. She has involved herself in so much, and which is very useful, but it's so much so where we look around now, because she never even thought twice about childhood trauma with people. And so now first off, she's like put back a little bit the whole fact that so many people are affected by it, especially men. It's underreported, but it can be quite obvious when you look around and you start seeing other men's behaviors. We both do it. We look around and we're like, what baggage does he have that happened to him? Because he's obviously exhibiting those features. And so it's so interesting to me, the whole idea behind it, because, or not idea, it's the physiological idea. It is what it is. And so it's very telling.
Yeah, very much so. And that's why I loved the second book I mentioned, which was the What Happened to You, Dr. Bruce Perry. And it changes, you know, like, you're a cop, I'm a cop, like, we're judgmental people, but by nature, because it helps keep us safe a lot of the time, we have to make very quick, like, judgments of people's intentions and their behaviors and their physiological reactions, because, you know, that might keep us safe. But, you know, it does make us go like, what the fuck's wrong with that bloke? Whereas when you change that mindset of like, what's wrong with you, and like everything, like you're saying with childhood trauma and everything, it's like, what happened to you? What happened to make you respond that way, to make you react that way, to have that amount of stress in your body? Like, it allows compassion and empathy and grace into a world where, yes, we still can make like snap judgments, and it's good to be, you know, you can never stop being a cop. You're always like aware of your surroundings and what's going on. And I was even like talking to my kid the other day about like the mental processes I go through of like when we go to like a cinema or a shopping center, and I'm like, something happens, like I'm grabbing you like this and I'm grabbing Leo like this and we're running. And he just kind of was like, Mom's crazy. But
Quite normal in our household.
exactly. But like, it just allowing that question to be asked, I think it does. And it's not something that I've always known, and it's definitely only happened over like the last few years. But when you sort of allow that question to be maybe your first thought, it really, it's powerful and it's impactful.
And that's the whole premise behind, or the, I should say, undertone of my book is a cause and effect. So like anything that happened at one point in your life, where it comes out later, and it will, it's kind of like a car that gets, you know, that rolls over and gets out of alignment. You may fix the outside of the car, but the car is going to ride crooked. You know, there's something happened to cause that. And so I think that's something that needs to be monitored throughout one's life. It's not a bad thing. It is what it is. But I mean, there is a cause and effect for everybody.
Yeah. And that is an excellent segue, because that was like my next question. But what made you want to put yourself out there, put your story out there in such like a raw, honest way, that, you know, you can be that authentic and just be like, you know what, here it is. What was behind that?
Well, I think not enough men are. And I should add, my book's not just for men. I mean, and it's not just for law enforcement professionals. It's for anybody, because addiction's addiction. But I think that it's important, in order, part of the healing process is those vulnerabilities. There is humility needs to be shown. And I have had so many smoke screens and masks on my whole life. It's liberating for me to be able to talk about these things or to share it with others. And so I felt it was important for me to do. I don't care about book sales. I don't care about money. I honestly don't. I swear to you, I don't. All I care about is helping like one person. You know, that's really all I want, because the hell that I put my family through and I put myself through, I don't want anybody else to get to that point. And fortunately, I mean, it's been amazing. I've had a couple people reach out that said that, you know, they can either relate or they have a similar story. I mean, addiction all looks the same for everybody. It really does. And so just hearing those stories from other people is like so gratifying to me, because I'm like, okay, it's working. Because in the end, if we continue to just put up those smoke screens and not talk about things, we're just going to continue the cycle of, you know, it's never going to get better for anybody.
Yeah. No, and I think it is really important, like I have said previously, that you are putting your truth out there, because like you're saying, even if it's just one person, it makes a difference, and whether it's addiction, whether it's suicidal ideation, whether it's depression, whether it's PTSD, like any of the things, like we've sort of, I have the privilege of having these conversations with a lot of people, and so many of them like share their truth, and it's, the terms like, being brave and being courageous get thrown around a lot like these days. But coming from your life experience and coming from the world that you came from, I think there is something incredibly brave and incredibly courageous, because you have, by the sounds of it, not only fought the stigma from like your childhood in terms of like your dad's like cynicism towards things like that, but then also a 22-year career where we are taught just to shut the fuck up and just soldier on and get on with it. And you're like, no, you know what? Like, most of us are not okay. We are not okay. And I am an example of this, and I'm putting it out there so that others know that, like, drinking to excess, not okay. You're just hiding the truth from yourself. And I think it's awesome. And I'm really, really happy for you. And please, I think I was like, did it just come out in May? Oh my goodness! So it's only been like a month.
Oh, thank you. It did. Yeah, it's been a month. Took me a year to write, but again, if anybody else is thinking about writing a book, it is very therapeutic.
I was going to say sounds super cathartic. Yeah, that's awesome. Where can people find it and buy it?
Yes, it is. I tell everybody Amazon. There's Walmart.com and BarnesandNoble.com, but Amazon seems to be the easiest, but you can find it on there. Sober from Sin.
Yeah. And can people purchase like from you if they want you to like sign it or anything like that?
You know what? I haven't done that yet. I know I can. I have the capability. So my contact, so I have a website. It's thejefffields.com altogether. And from there, I have contact information. If somebody reached out to me, I'm sure I could make that happen where they could purchase it from me and we can get it out there.
Okay, awesome. Can I be one of those people?
Absolutely. You need to email me your address. You don't have to purchase it, Erin.
Brilliant. Oh, well, Jeff, we're not going to talk about such silly things. My other question was, I am a person who I love listening to self-help type style books on Audible. Are you going down that path? Is that, I don't really know how that kind of thing works.
Yes. If my wife has anything to do with it, I will, because she's the same way as you. I don't know if she'll listen to my book. It's too painful for her, which I get it. But yeah, no, I'm in the process of exploring that. I've talked to a couple of authors, how they do it. And so, yes, that is the plan. That is like the 3-month plan for me right now, to try to get that.
Brilliant. I love it. Well, please let me know when you do so I can share it on my page, because I know you hate social media, so I will share it on your behalf.
It's useful. I should say it's very useful.
I just look at it like it's a little bit of fun. So if you don't take it too seriously and don't like get in,
it is. Go down the rabbit hole. Don't go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, don't get in arguments with fuckwits, basically. It's like my main rule. And you also I saw that you also have a like a consulting business, what, public safety, all that kind of thing. Tell me.
Yeah, so I started that when I left the government. I was trained in active shooter instruction to train others, and like I said, I have a 7-year-old and another one to come. So I think I'm very passionate about the safety of our children. And then also going back to social media and phones. So many people are disconnected with what's around them. And it's a safety issue, and bad guys thrive on it. I mean, we used to investigate them. We know what they look for. And so I thought that it was needed to put out there. I'm real big on situational awareness and just trying to teach other people, just have a little bit of a plan. You just said it right now with your kids at the cinema, like you said. So, I mean, I don't want people to be over the top like my wife and I, because sometimes it's very uncomfortable, but there is something to be said about just being prepared. And so I just figured I would have something like that out there available to people who want that resource.
No, I mean, look, and I mean, your kids, my kids, they're both children of first responders. So they're kind of up shit creek when it comes to, I think, like some kind of a normal childhood. But I think it's, is it something that I got taught, when I went through the academy, and it was like an evidentiary rule, but it was like, you'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So even as like, I mean, yeah, my eldest is almost 8, but we sort of live down the road from an area where lots of sort of interesting people hang out, shall we say. And we walk with him, and he is my littlest one. He's just like, ooh, whatever. But my eldest is like, he's switched on and he's observant, and you kind of like, we say to him, I'm like, see that person over there? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, just watch. And then like we walk past them and they're doing whatever it is that they're doing and whatever else. And I'm like, did you feel that sense in the pit of your stomach? And he was like, yeah. And I'm like, what did it make you feel? And he's like, it made me feel like scared and uncomfortable. And I'm like, you trust that. Anytime you feel that, I'm like, you trust it. I don't care if you speak rudely to someone. I don't care if you walk away from a situation. I'm like, you trust that. And if you tell me that you responded in a situation because that was the feeling you got, I'm like, never going to have any dramas from us, kid. Not once.
Yeah, that's my wife comes from a law enforcement family as well. But she unfortunately was raised with a little bit too much paranoia, and which can be detrimental. So it's that fine line, right, of teaching our kids. And I love how you're doing with your son. Yeah, because we try to do the same with our daughter, and it's tough. But I think that having some sort of at least foundation of things. The world's an ugly place. It's unfortunate. It is what it is, but you got to have the tools. And I had somebody said it about us. Well, you can't shelter your kids too much because, they need to know the real world. And I'm like, their mom and dad both were in law enforcement. Trust me, they're going to know the real world. Your kids are the ones I'm worried about,
Yeah, they know exactly. I think there's that like delicate balance, because I was like, my husband being like a firefighter, like the fentanyl ODs, and it was like the heroin epidemic before that. And so him and I are both hypervigilant about different things. Like it's this kind of weird mix. But I know from like my childhood, like my mum sort of always tried to like speak the truth to us. And it was something I appreciated, because when you are left in the dark about something, like you freaking know. And adults can infantilize children in the sense of like think that they're not perceptive and they're not picking up what's going on. And if my kid asks me a question, I never go, like, I'll tell you about it later, or like whatever else. I try to like, I mean, both of their grandfathers are not here anymore. And my husband's father passed away from Parkinson's, and obviously mine from suicide. My kids have questions. So I answer it in an age appropriate way, and I do the very best that I can. And I'm not perfect, and kids don't come with an instruction manual. So I'm sure that I make mistakes, but I always just kind of go, if you have questions, buddy, I'm like, I'm never going to get mad for anything that you ask. And I'd rather you be asking me rather than listening to some, random you watch on YouTube that's telling you to do something silly, like, so I think just, having that open level of communication and trying not to scare them is like, it's a delicate balance.
Yeah. And I forgot to add, that's another huge reason I wrote my book is because my daughter, I want her to read it one day and understand what daddy went through, and how it's okay to show humility. Because she was young enough where she didn't understand, but kids are perceptive. She knew.
Mhm. Yeah. She would have been able to feel the tension between you and your wife. She would have known when daddy was a bit acting a bit strange and all that kind of thing. But yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. She avoided me, and she's a daddy's girl. So it was painful. So yeah, I think I when she's ready and she understands, she's can read my book.
It was something that I was actually going to ask you about, because I think as well, like, when we as parents show our kids that we have made mistakes, I think it opens the door, like a very big, wide cognitive door for them to kind of go, oh, like, it's okay to make a mistake. I don't have to be perfect. It's, and that, one of those things that's like, I'll always apologize to my kids. If I snap at them, if I stuff up, whatever it is. I think that, and like you said, like humility, when we think that these people in our life are infallible, I think it's dangerous. So even from like those young ages, being able to go, oh, I made a mistake. Oh, that's all right, buddy. Let's do it again. Let's try again. All that kind of thing. Like, and I think that will be a really powerful experience for both of your daughters at some point in their future when they're ready.
Yeah, I hope so.
I really think that. All right. I have taken up a lot of Jeff's time today, so I really appreciate it. Is there anything else that you want to mention before we ask our final questions and wrap it up?
I've been trying to tell people, hey, the book is not for just people that are suffering. It's for wives that want a better understanding of what it looks like, or for those that you love, or for somebody that wants to be proactive, like you said. So, and then agency managers. I mean, come on. I mean, the education needs to be there. We train nonstop on doing silly tactical things. If your brain's not working, it's what is it for if you're not mentally set?
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree more. And I will put, I know he's mentioned a couple of things while we've been talking. I will put all of Jeff's website details, contact information in the show notes. Follow him on social media. It's Sober from Sin. Yes. So yeah, all of the things will be in the show notes. But yes, I do appreciate your time. We normally finish these episodes by asking our guests 2 questions. And it comes from obviously the title, I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness, which you and I now both have a shared love of Brené. So, which is wonderful. So the first question I like to ask is, what do you do to hold space for your darkness?
When you asked me that earlier, I was struggling on trying to find a good answer for that. I mean, I think if anything, if I never forget where I came from, I always say, never forget the point of your departure. Departure being the minute you failed, screwed up, whatever it is. Because if you remember that, you're able to share with others what it looked like. And you can also remind yourself what it looked like to yourself so you don't go back to
that. No, that's really powerful. I've not heard that one before. That's a good one. And then additionally, what can someone do in order to help you and support you and help you in terms of holding space for your darkness?
I think education is a big thing. I mean, I think people listen to things, but they don't act. What do they say? Action, or what is it? Oh man, I'm going to screw it up. I can't even remember now. If you just intake, but don't act on it, it doesn't, you're not fulfilling the full obligation you may have as a human, right? And so I think in order to help me to fill that space is others doing the same thing and paying it forward. Just like I'm trying to pay it forward. So, I mean, if that makes sense and all that, I wish I could remember what I was trying to say, but.
Sorry. No, but I think there's the nugget behind that. It's like as well, like your actions speak louder than your words. So it's all very well for me to sit here and be like, I support you, Jeff. But if I'm not showing up with intention and supporting you in the actions, then what good is it for me to tell you I'm supporting you if nothing I'm doing is contributing to helping you in your process in that respect? So makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, let's be intentional about life.
Yes, very much so. All right. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience with some technical issues that hopefully no one here knows about. We'll wrap it up. And this has been another episode of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness, a first responder mental health podcast. I've been your host, Erin Jane. Thank you so much, Jeff, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Erin.
And as always, let me listen in a way you've never been heard. Cheers.
Hi guys, it's Erin Jane here. Firstly, thank you for listening to I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness. This podcast really is for you, the listener. And I hope you're finding as much value in listening to these conversations as I am in having them. If you'd like to offer any feedback, suggest a subject matter, are interested in being a podcast guest, or would like to get in contact to receive first responder life and wellness coaching services, please reach out. You can find me on Instagram at Erin Jane Coaching or the dedicated podcast account ErinJane_Darkness Podcast, or my website www.erinjanecoaching.com. I look forward to hearing from you, and I'm so grateful to have you as part of this darkness community. Cheers.